the intentional decision making is really important because when you feel resentful, when you feel guilty, you know that it's not aligned with how you actually want to live. And that makes it a problem. And this is why the emotions are so important.
Welcome to the Lara Jane Layton Show. This podcast is for you, the person who keeps putting others first. Your self-talk has held you back. You no longer need to take a second seat. Let's explore ways to overcome self-doubt. You can silence that inner bully voice and achieve your full potential. Here's your host, Lara Jane.
Welcome to the show, friend. My new best friend, Rishma, is with me today, and I am so excited. I always talk about prioritizing the important things in our lives and making sure that, we all have the same amount of time and that we're not saying, I don't have time. We're saying, I have something else on my plate right now, so that there's that balance. But Rishma's brought it to my attention that we have subconscious things going on in our lives that really affect our prioritizations and how we make decisions. And sometimes maybe looking underneath is going to help us a lot more than just setting our priorities. So I'm excited for this. Information about hers in the show notes. So let's get started. And Rishma, help me figure out how to know if I'm setting my priorities right so I can make better decisions.
Yeah, such a good question. And I'm so excited to talk to you. It's a really big question, right? I feel like a lot of times we get advice from other people or the outside world that you have to do this, you have to do this. And you and I both don't agree with that. Everyone's situation is different. Every context is different. If you're taking care of kids, if you're taking care of, someone who's elderly or someone who needs care, that context is very, very different. So everything I do is very contextual. And what I usually say is good advice when out of context can become bad advice. Because if someone's telling me what to do and it doesn't fit my context, it doesn't fit my situation, then that's not going to be the right advice for me. So when we talk about prioritization, I think that's the first thing to pay attention to is what is my context? What are my responsibilities? What are the things that are actually important to me, but also that I might not be able to control. I can't control how long it takes me to drive my kids to school and back. I can't control that, my mom is having a hard time with her health and I have to visit her every day. It's something that I want. It's definitely on top of my priority list. I want to take care of my mom. I want to be able to be there for her, but also it's not something I can change in terms of time. So it's probably the context that I really want to highlight in this situation.
So when you talk about context, give me more information on that because I'm trying to put this into my own personal life of how do I contextualize this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, first of all, most people will see advice out there and say, okay, I need to do this. I have to get up at 5 a.m., do my meditation. Then I have to have my morning routine. You read all these books and it tells you to do all these things. And you think, okay, that's what I have to do to create my best life. But if your kid was up at 3 a.m, that doesn't work. So when I talk about context, usually I tell people, first, pay attention to what your context is in this moment. And it changes, right? It might change with a health issue. It might change with the weather. Who knows? It'll change with different circumstances. Maybe you wake up and you're tired that day, and that changes your plan for the day. So the context can change, but there are two things that I think people need to pay attention to, or at least it's helpful if they pay attention to it. One is my context real or is it perceived? And there are real things that impact my day, real responsibilities that I am not going to let go of, that I'm not willing to let go of, that I can't let go of. And then there are perceived responsibilities or perceived constraints. So I have this term that I use called decision constraints. When we're trying to make a choice about what we want to do in life, even if we just want to make a choice about what we do in our day, right? We need to pay attention to that context. And there are some things that are real. So for me, for example, I've got 2 teenage kids and one of them swims competitively. So she's in the pool at 5 a.m, 4 times a week. She's in the pool after school another 4 times a week. And so that is a big part of my context because I have to regulate my sleep so that I can drive her around, right? And so this is part of my real context. But there's also a whole bunch of other things like being an athlete, and she's 14. I think that she needs to eat well and drink her water and have her electrolytes and make sure that she is healthy. And a lot of me feels like I have to do that for her. I have to help her make her breakfast. Otherwise, she's not going to eat properly. She's not so proactive about drinking her water. She forgets because she's in the pool. That is a perceived decision constraint, right? Because really, at some point, she has to learn how to take care of herself, right? So there's a
Yeah.
balance between being her mom and then taking care of her. And how I do that is going to change day to day. But there is a perception there. I'm not saying I shouldn't help her. Of course I should. She's really, she gets really tired, understandably. I get tired. I'm not even in the pool. I'm just driving her. So the context makes a difference, right? Is this a real contextual thing that I have to account for, or is it perceived? And that will change how I make my priorities. That will change how I make my decisions. That will change what I expect of myself, because that's the other thing. We often measure our own success based on certain definitions. So as a mom, I want to be a certain way. As a professional, I want to be a certain way. As a wife, as, all of these roles that I play in life, I have certain expectations of myself. And if I don't account for my context, I'm going to feel like I'm failing in some way or another until I realize, well, actually, I just didn't have the capacity because I've been up since 4:30 in the morning. I have to give myself some grace. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally makes sense. And I'm trying to conceptualize my own life and go, why do I feel these things are a priority? Why is it that they're on my to-do list in the first place? And, that's going to take some time to reflect and to really get to really decide what is it. I don't think that's something I can do in a moment. It's like, oh, why do I do this? And so do you have a practice or a pros and cons or a something that we do to make sure that we're really looking at this from the outside in instead of where we're all tied up in the emotion?
Yeah, for sure. I actually have quite a few little strategies I can talk about. The first one is writing it all down, just acknowledging that it's there. Like, my dad needed help. He was sick. My mother in law was in the hospital. I needed to go there. These are just things that happened. Or, like I said, these perceived decision constraints that I don't always want to admit that they're
Mhm.
perceived. Sometimes it feels like, no, this is something real. Like, I actually can't leave the house because my kids are going to be home at 3 o'clock. Is that real though? My kids are teenagers. I probably could leave and do something for myself. So sometimes it's really about self honesty. So what I do is I write it all down and then I try to separate myself from the piece of paper, because when it's in your head, you believe that it's right. This is how humans work. We want to believe ourselves, right? We think we're right
Mhm.
all the time. And that's a function of humanity. It's good, but it also can interfere with how we view things. So when I write it down, it gives me a little bit of emotional distance and I can look at it and then I can be really honest with myself and say, do I need to pick up after my daughter every time? Do I need to be there every single day for my dad? Or can I be there some days and some days I can do something else? It sort of gives me a way to be creative with the way that I approach my context. So the first thing is to write it down. And then the second thing is to separate what is a real decision constraint and what is a perceived decision constraint. And like I said, these two things change. It might evolve over time, but having that understanding of right now, my kids need me to drive them around. That's maybe the reality for another 2 years, 3 years until they start driving. Maybe they go away for school. That's my reality for the next few years. It gives me a little bit more freedom, although maybe other people might not describe it as freedom, but for me, it feels freeing because I can now put off some of the other things that I feel like I need to be doing, right? I can say, okay, I'm going to have time for that later. Right now, I really want to maximize my time with my kids. And so it helps me identify my priorities and put them in a different context, because there's a lot of me that wants to do other things. I want to take dance classes. I want to learn how to sew. I want to do all of these other things. And I'm trying to make time to do that for myself. But I also want to recognize that life changes and I don't know what life is going to look like in 3 years. And so what is going to be important for me right now is going to be different than what's important to me in 3 years. My life is going to be very different in 3 years.
Yeah, and sometimes our lives turn overnight and it's
Yes.
just like, bam, this is a new life for you, and it's how do we find the peace and adjustment? And you were talking about I need to be home. My kids are going to be home. And I was thinking about, I was a working professional. I was never home when the kids got home. I was always late. And yeah, I have to tell people the daycare did a great job on my kids because I wasn't the only one involved in their upbringing. And it took me a lot of self-reflection to not feel guilty in those times. And so I know that we have both extremes of I need to be there because I still wanted to be there. I just knew that that wasn't in the cards. And so how do we also not feel guilty when we contextualize this to a point where we aren't doing something that we were taught? Every mother greets their children when they come home from school, and it's an honorable thing, and children need to feel love, but not all of us have that. I'm gonna call it a luxury, even though could be a necessity depending on your children. So
Yeah, this is such a good question because I had the same situation before I started working at home. I was outside of the house and had the same, either way, you're going to feel guilt. A lot of us, right? Whether you're out, whether you're home, you're going to feel guilty about something, right? I'm not there for my work. I'm not there for my kids. And so I have to give an example and then I can give you the sort of takeaway message that I learned. When I was young, my parents are immigrants. So my mom was working and studying at night. My dad was working 3 jobs and I was in daycare really late at night. And I have this memory of my mom being like a super mom, right? She just did everything and she was just amazing. So when I became a mom, I started talking to her about this. And I said, Mom, how did you do everything? You just managed to keep it all together. You were always happy. You were always there to tuck me into bed. Like you just never missed anything. You never let anything drop, even though I know you were really busy and I know you were going to school and working. And she said, Are you kidding? I felt guilty all the time. Whenever I would pick you up from daycare, I brought you a chocolate bar because I felt bad that I had to pick you up late instead of right after school. And I said, I remember that chocolate bar and it was the best part of my day. I loved when you picked me up. I loved seeing you. I loved hugging you. I loved getting to run to you when you picked me up. And this question or this discussion with my mom really changed my perspective. What I see as my failures or my successes is not necessarily what my kids see as my successes or my failures. In fact, they might have a totally different experience, and I can't control that. But generally speaking, it's very different than what we think it is. And so that really helped me to understand that when we feel bad, we can always look at it from another perspective. And so I've really tried to do that, even with, as an example, with a partner, like I've had a few people I've worked with where they say, in my relationship, forget about mothering, but just in my relationship with my partner, I feel like I need to be able to be there. I need, you learn sort of from your parents. I have to do the housework. I have to, do a certain way if you had that kind of home situation at home. And I had one lady who I worked with, and she said, It's funny, my husband actually doesn't like it when I take care of him. He likes me independent, but I didn't grow up in a way that taught me that I should be independent as a woman. I was taught that I should take care of the household chores. And so for years, they would go back and forth with this guilt that she was feeling and this dissatisfaction, let's call it, because she wasn't doing things for herself. And she always felt almost resentful. And I think that's where the intentional decision making is really important because when you feel resentful, when you feel guilty, you know that it's not aligned with how you actually want to live. And that makes it a problem. And this is why the emotions are so important. We're always told, make sure you make your decisions logically. Don't let emotion get in the way. And I really disagree with that. I feel like emotions are always there. There are so many situations where there are emotions involved and you have to acknowledge them. You have to address them. You have to really understand what they are in order to be able to feel good about that choice.
I really, really resonate with that. I think it's extremely important, and our emotions are that thing that loves what we're doing or is dissatisfied with what we're doing. And if it feels good, it is good. But if it feels kind of bad and you can't shake that guilt, there's a elimination need to figure that out. And whether you meditate on it or journal it or whatever that piece is, it's not something that just happens. So I'm just really going through some of those things in my brain going, would I have made a different decision had I done it this way? And there are some cases where that's absolutely yes. And other cases where I don't know, I could be, so it's like, how do I, I think one of the things that I want to say is we got to let go of the past. And if you made a decision 10 years ago that took you down a path, look at the things you gained from that path and don't beat yourself up on the decision that you took because it's an experiment, We don't know where paths are going to take us. And if I make the wrong turn today, it's okay. I can feel that. If it starts to feel icky, I can fix it. So it's really staying in tune with your heart.
Yeah. I think this is a really important point. I talk a lot about what happens after you make a decision. Most people spend a lot of time thinking about before the decision, right? Is this the right decision? What will I do? Which way should I go? And that's important to think about what decision is not the right decision necessarily, but what's the right decision for you in this moment. Because it's going to be different for everyone and it's different depending on what you know right now, where you are in your life, your context, all of that. But I think a lot of people don't pay attention to what happens after you make a choice in life, right? Because there are so many things that happen that are sort of a follow up to that decision.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, for example, the biggest one I can give the example is if you decide to have kids, let's say you choose, I want to have a family, I want to have kids. There are a lot of things that happen after that. It's not that you might not choose, I wish I didn't have kids. Of course, people hopefully don't regret that decision, but everyone's in their own situation. But let's say you've made this choice and you love your kids. We still feel guilty about not wanting to be at home all the time or wanting to have some space to ourselves or having some self-care. We have this, it's sort of a societal rhetoric, right? Like moms should be a certain way and we feel guilty. But when you think about it, in order to have that decision to come true, in order to have kids, you have to give something up. You have to give up your time, your sleep, your patience sometimes, your identity, your freedom sometimes, in different ways for different people, depending on the family. And I think we don't spend enough time recognizing that the things that we give up, sometimes we have to let them go and recognize that that's a choice that I made. And sometimes we have to acknowledge that it was painful. It's hard to give up some of these things. It's hard if you move across the country and you had to leave your family behind because you're moving for a job. That creates pain because you're not beside your family, and that's okay to acknowledge that. So some of it is the grieving process of what you've left behind, whether it was your independence, whether it was your family, whether it was your alone time. I remember when my kids were really little, I really just wanted some alone time. I wanted to be able to close the door while I was going to the bathroom. Um, and to recognize that this is, again, a stage in life, but also it's not easy to give that stuff up. Doesn't mean I would change it necessarily, but it is something that I gave up, and it's okay to mourn that. It's also okay to recognize that maybe success looks really different now than it did before. My career had to change. That's okay. Maybe it looks different. Maybe I can make space for it. Maybe I can change the way that I approach it. I can be creative with the solutions. So I think you make a good point about, and I talk about this a lot, is what happens after a choice is made.
I'm completely always preaching that you can change right now. If
Yes.
you're not liking something in your life, you can step in a new direction. It may take a while to get far enough away from it that it's still not impacting you, but we have a choice right now. You don't have to wait for next year. If you really needed more freedom right now and you couldn't drive your kids to swimming, you could find a choice. There's Uber, there's all these there's friends, there's letting them drive illegally to by themselves. I mean, there's a choice. Some of them are stupid, yes, but that's part of brainstorming. What are my options? What can I do? And what could I step towards? And so if there is something that is feeling heavy, look at your options. We're power women. We made, look where we're at. Look who we are. Every one of us are moving forward and making decisions every day for businesses. Why can't we do it for our own personal life? Like the businesses trust us. Why don't our spouses trust us? Why don't I? And it really is giving you the okay to step away.
Yeah, I think the options thing is really important. We often feel like we're boxed in, right? Like you're boxed into your role as a mom, as a caregiver, whatever that role is. We feel like it's tight. We don't have a lot of choice. But actually there are so many options, as you say. And I find also even personally, but I've seen in a lot of people too, we preempt our choices because we have a certain thought or belief system where we kind of stop ourselves like, oh, I can't go out because I need to be around for X, Y, and Z. Or I can't make this thing work because I also have to do this other thing. And it's almost like I didn't even go down that path of thinking about it or looking at my options or trying to figure out what does that actually mean. It's just this is how I've done it. And so this is how I continue to do it. And there's no other way. And so we almost cut off our options before we even have a chance to brainstorm about them. So I love what you're saying about just being able to freely talk about whatever. I have a process my husband and I do on a big whiteboard. We call it the dump, where we write down every single thing we want and we don't think about what it means for the family, what it means for each other, what it means for our age. Like nothing is off limits. We just write down every single thing. I call it the dump of like getting clarity of what I want. And then we kind of go through and sift through and we challenge each other and we say, you think that this is not possible. Is that true? Can we explore this for a little while? And that dumping process is really engaging because it almost feels like anything is possible.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. I could put a lot of fun things on that board because there's a lot I want. And it's not that I can't have them. I just haven't taken that step yet. Like uh, we want an RV to travel across the United States. Um, I don't really want it right now, but I want it sometime. And it's on my list, but I don't need it right now. So it is. It's looking at those and going, it's on the list. It's just not now. And
Yeah.
some of it's not now because I just don't want to do it yet. you know? And if I get, like, I had a grandma that was going to, well, I guess she was my great grandma, was going to do a bunch of, I'm going to write down all the names on all the pictures when I retire and I get old, older. And then when it came that time, she was blind. She never got the opportunity for those things that she was going to do. And so we also need to look at that is if I put this off and never get the opportunity, is that okay? If I never travel around the United States, guess what? That's okay. Just sounds fun. And so it's like, is it okay to put off and really look at it?
Yeah. This is something that I really believe in. I have these sort of ways that I classify when I'm explaining how our subconscious thoughts work. Because oftentimes we choose things, but actually our brains can only handle 5 to 10% of our decisions that are conscious. Most of our decisions are unconscious. Yes, I'm seeing your
Wow.
face. It's surprising, right? Like this is sort of it's surprising to think about most of our decisions in life are made and we don't even realize that we made them. I don't pay attention to when I'm driving at home. I make the choice to drive and turn left here and turn right here. And my brain just does it for me. Right. And sometimes that's useful. I don't want to be thinking about driving home every single time I'm driving home. I want to be able to think about other things. I want to listen to a podcast. Right. But there are other things that we do automatically that we want to think about because we maybe don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to be thinking in that way anymore. And so there's a lot of different things that happen inside our brains. And so what I described, there's sort of four tendencies, let's call it, or ways that we tend to handle our life in a way that maybe we don't want to. Let's call it that. And one of the things, as you mentioned, it's okay not to want something right now. It's okay to put something off. I usually say it's okay to defer something. It's okay to have something on your to-do list or on your want list or your goal list and say, I don't have the capacity for that right now. It's not on my top priorities right now. It's really not that important. It's not really aligned with my values. It's okay to defer. Put it off, say no, create boundaries. All of that is okay. If we go into the subconscious, that's like a conscious choice, right? If we go into the subconscious, usually when we're deferring too much, what I call it is drifting. Oh, I don't want to deal with that tough conversation. So I'm just going to avoid the conversation. It's not a conscious choice, right? It usually just happens. Oh, my friend is asking me about this thing. I'm going to change the subject. Like I don't think about it consciously, but I avoid it. Or, oh, I had this really painful experience, I'll give you an example. I went to school with someone and she passed away quite young. And it really affected me. I found out on Facebook. It was like a very shocking experience where I thought, no, this can't be right. This must be fake news. I went to school with her. She's younger than me. And I found it was true. She had been going through something. I had lost touch with her a little bit. And it was really upsetting to me. And I just I couldn't handle it in that moment. And I went to work. That was my way of sort of automatically responding to this emotional pain, right? And so sometimes we do that and it's okay. It's a protective mechanism, but sometimes we need to deal with those things, right? So there's these subconscious things we do and then the conscious things. So one of them is defer, put something off to later. But if you do it too much, then that pain or the desire, it gets put off for too long and then we avoid it and then we feel sort of dissatisfied or upset or more pain adds up.
Ah, man, how do we make that decision? Like, we can't predict the future. It's just not in. There are people that have premonitions. There are people that know, but it's not really a prediction. We don't know what tomorrow brings. And so, how do we wrap that into our decision making process? Because that is kind of tough.
Yeah.
But let's talk about it in just a moment. Let's get a quick word from our sponsor. When we come back, it's like, how do we put not being able to predict the future into our decision making process? Because it's pretty tough. So we'll be right back. Hey, since I rarely have openings in my coaching schedule, I have a new resource out there on my website. It is called the BFF Coaching Network. And I have offered a spot there for any coach that has been on the show to list their coaching. You can go out there, you can listen to their episodes, you can feel a little bit about them, and then choose a coach that will work for you. So LauraJaneLayton.com, the BFF Coaching Network. All right, Rishma, help me, because now I'm thinking about, like, I like to be able to defer, but now I have to decide, what does it cost to defer this? The RV thing, that doesn't cost me anything, because it's going to be just fine. And it may cost that I don't see parts of the US later in life. No big deal. But there are things that matter. Do I put off a surgery? Do I put off fixing of my house, my car, all these things? Because we got to make that decision. How do we measure its impact to make a better
Yeah,
decision?
that's a really good question. There's a couple of things I want to say here. There are two types of, let's call them decisions that you can make. One is a short-term vision, like this is something I need right now. This is something I want to decide about right now. And then there's what I call a vision decision, where it's a longer-term vision of my life. This is what I would like for my life. And when you're thinking about a vision decision, usually it takes time to think about, you have to understand your needs, your wants. You want to separate your wants from other people, what other people's opinions, things that people think that you should want or things that you think you should want based on society. Like we really need to spend a little bit of time brainstorming, what is something that I want for my life? And is this something that's true to what I want or what I see for my life versus what everyone else thinks that I should be doing? So that takes a little bit of a little bit of time, a little bit of a process. But when you have that vision that's a little bit more clear, it doesn't have to be exact, but I think of it as sort of a compass. Am I directionally going in the right way? I don't have to be exactly right with every single decision, but does it sort of get me to where I want it to go? Right? I want to have a good family life. So, generally speaking, if I'm spending time with my kids, it doesn't mean I have to spend every day with them, but I have to have some quality moments, right? It's sort of directionally in the way that I want to go. And then there are more immediate decisions that we need to make that are short term. Do I take this job? Do I move? Do I get the surgery? Very immediate type of decisions that I have to say are harder to make when you don't have a vision decision. I mean, medical is maybe different because some of those things are very nuanced, but do I take this job? Do I move to this city? Those are harder to make when you don't have sort of a longer term idea of what you want your life to look like, what kinds of things are important to you right now. Of course, it might change. So in those situations, usually the first thing I tell people to do is to untangle all of the components of that decision. So if you think about moving or getting a new job or even a surgery, should I get the surgery? It's not urgent. Do I need it? Maybe I don't. There are a lot of things that are tangled up into that decision. How much does it cost? Is my health going to be better or worse? Is it going to impact my life? Am I going to move away from family? Is this job going to pay me more money? Do I feel like I'm capable of this job? There's so many different pieces that are tangled. I kind of think of it like a braid where there's all these little strands that are braided into this choice, and it makes it very cluttered and very confusing. So usually what I say is first, let's untangle all of the different things, the real things, the things that are logistical, the emotions, the fears, all of that. Let's untangle all of that and then address them one by one. And it seems like a lot of work because there might be many strands, but it actually creates a lot of clarity because when I start to think of, let's say, a job situation, I was in the situation where I was deciding whether to leave a job. I was working at multiple jobs. And one of the jobs I was doing, I thought, it's really late at night. I have to drive really far. It was a very, it didn't work for my life at the moment, but I was really hesitant to give it up. And it sort of seemed clear when I would talk about it that I should leave this job. It wasn't working for me, but I just couldn't give it up. And I realized that that job felt very prestigious. And I thought, well, I don't want to make my choice based on what people think of me. But for some reason, because I got this job, I felt like I had to continue it. And as soon as I untangled that strand and realized that that was sort of the emotional hesitation that I was feeling, I thought, I don't agree with that. I don't want to make my life choices based on that. It just happened that that's how I felt. I didn't recognize that. So when you untangle your emotions and everything involved in a decision, it becomes a lot more clear to make that choice.
I'm thinking back of some of my decisions and looking at that, and prestige always was a piece of a decision. Um, when I stepped down from an executive role, just decided I didn't need that anymore. It was painful to have people always kind of stabbing you, yet still being successful. People just like to find fault with their leaders, give them an excuse. I don't know. So, stepping down from that was really difficult because I was so proud of the accomplishment. It's like I did this. Now I don't get to hold on to it anymore. But my life was so much better. And I ended up having equal responsibility and equal prestige as my other titles grew. Um, and so it was worth it at the moment. It still is. I would not have changed that decision because it gave me more time. I quit traveling every other week. I quit, that thing that takes you away. And what a beautiful thing to be able to give that up. But it is hard. I mean, until you experience it, because we do identify with our accomplishments.
Yeah.
Because what else do you want to share with your friends? Oh, guess what? I fell down. I'm really feeling overwhelmed. I'm depressed. We don't share that side of our lives very often. And it's only the really trusted people that get to know that side. And so, yes, my very best friends all knew that too. But, but though in general, that's not where you want to go. Guess what? I,
Yeah. And even if you don't publicize it, it just feels good that you've accomplished it. And then you have to go through this, like I said, a grieving process that's sort of like um, how do I describe it? When I left this position, it was like, I have to go through this grieving process because I define myself according to this jaw. When I introduce myself in a room, this is how I introduce myself. When I talk to people, it's sort of a way of an identity almost. And then I had to let go of that and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing something different now. And it sort of takes a little while to say, okay, I'm going to say goodbye to this identity. I'm going to say goodbye to this definition of success, that amount of money I was making, that the position, the title that I had, the the way that I was able to introduce myself, all of that stuff I'm going to be able to let go now. And I have to work through the emotion of letting that go in order to embrace the next thing that's there for me in my life. And when you sort of insulate yourself from everyone else's opinion, I knew that was the right decision for me. But when I had to face other people, it took a while.
Yes, it does. You're so used to that hat. It's your comfy hat. I'm going to work. It's my comfy hat. I do this well. And you change that hat and it's uncomfortable for a while. But you put on your mom hat, and some days it's like, these are my children. I'm introducing them. You have those hats. And I work hard on integrating my me hat into all those. And so
Mhm.
that I'm not a different person. But you don't go to the office and chat about your kids. You don't go to parent teacher conference and chat about your job. So we do have times when certain conversations are appropriate and not. But I just want a me hat and nothing else.
Yeah, we need a me hat. And we forget who we are sometimes because we're busy taking care of other people. And even in our jobs, taking care of our jobs, taking care of people. We need a me hat for sure. And we have to sort of an opportunity to grow and redefine who we are. For me, although it was hard to leave a job that I loved, I found happiness in another job or in another thing that I was doing. But also, I opened up my definition of success because
Hmm.
now my kids think that I have a cool job and they think that I do cool things, which is a success for me, that they think it's interesting what I do. Before they didn't understand what I did. And now they're like, oh, this is so interesting that you're writing and you're doing all these things. They can relate to it in a different way. And that's a different measure of success that I didn't understand before. Because usually we define our success in certain ways. And at least for me, as a child of immigrants, I defined my success as how many qualifications do I have? How much money am I making? What is my title? And that's what I knew. And it wasn't bad. That was how my parents knew to teach me to be able to survive in a country that they didn't understand. But for me, I have this, I'm going to call it a luxury because they didn't have that opportunity to reinvent myself, to take care of my self-care, to spend time on my emotions where they didn't really have that opportunity. To me, that's success too.
Today's society is so much more open to that than when our parents were doing what we're doing now. And I'm so grateful to be able to say, this is me. This is how I identify in all walks of life. And if you have that at least one constant that you take everywhere, it just feels so much more peaceful and feel more authentic. You don't feel like you're hiding pieces of you when you can take that one piece or two pieces. The more the better everywhere you go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to be able to look at your life and feel happy with your life. I don't want to say happy because, of course, life is not always happy, but to feel content with the things that are happening around you. And sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's hard. We've talked about having to take care of parents who are aging. It's hard sometimes. It's hard to see them. It's hard to disagree with them. If I'm honest, like my dad doesn't take care of himself the way that I think he should. And we disagree and it's not easy. But I also feel good about the fact that I'm able to have those difficult conversations, that I'm able to be able to communicate with him. I can see him maybe not as much as he needs, but definitely as much as I can do. And that makes me feel more peaceful with the choices I make, the time I spend with him. And there's a balance because, of course, I do feel like I have to be there every time he needs me. But there's part of me that realizes I can't give him what I don't have. So there's definitely a juggle and a balance in every single day. And the only way I can end up sleeping at night is feeling like I left time for what was important, which is him, and I saved time for the person who needs to be full at the end of it, which is me.
Let's hope that not bedtime's not the only time you get for yourself, but it is your time. It is your time where you can choose those affirmations as you go to sleep, or choose that you just nod off, or however, that is the one time you get 100% choice in the next 6 to 8 hours. And, I had I lived off 5.5 hours of sleep for years because that's what it took. And I've been noticing lately it's 8. I was like, "Oh my gosh, what is this? Does it feel any different?" Mm-mm. It feels the same. I have still the same amount, still drink my coffee in the morning because that's important, you but I don't feel less. I don't think at that time when I was doing the 4.5 to 5 hours that I felt sleep deprived. There's times I woke up and wanted 5 more minutes, but it was more of exhaustion over all the to-dos, and sometimes our to-do list is huge.
So often our to-do list is huge and it can get really, really overwhelming. And that's where even just spending a couple of minutes just thinking, okay, what do I need in this moment? Like sometimes it's so busy that that's the only question I can ask myself. That's the only time I have. I don't have time to journal and write everything down, but I can just say, what do I need today? Is that an emotional need? Is it a physical need? Do I need to eat more vegetables, drink more water? Do I need to be with myself? What do I need? Do I need a laugh? Like, do I need a hug? What do I need today? And sometimes that really helps to not just ground myself, but also offer um, that answering of a need that I have, that answering of taking care of myself, this like the person in me who's crying out, I can sort of answer her and be like, I can take care of you too. I can be here for you. Maybe not as much as you need, but as much as I have.
And appreciate the haves,
Mhm.
because we do get to choose. We do get to make bad decisions, make good decisions. You're either going to learn from it or you're going to keep going. It's okay. We fall down, but that teaches us that there's a rock right there and to step over it next time. So they're good for us. And much stronger are we from climbing out of rock bottom over and over and over again. Like every time it gets a little deeper, I thought this was rock bottom, but now I really know what rock bottom is. I don't want to find any new rock bottoms, but I know I will. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. And I think giving yourself that ability to say, it's okay, tomorrow's a new day. Also, I think sometimes it's hard to know what we need. Like if I ask myself, what do I need today? Sometimes it's, I need to stop beating myself up. I need to stop being hard on myself. I need to stop thinking I'm not doing a good job. And that's hard. It's hard to admit that to myself and it's hard to change. But when I do that, it's nice to be able to have that recognition, that awareness, and then the tool to be able to say, okay, let's create some distance. Let's figure out how to change that thought. Let's reframe how I perceive this to be, because that's not helping me either. It's not making me make good choices because then I'm hard on myself. I'm upset. Then maybe I'm reacting differently to my kids. Maybe I'm reacting differently to myself. I'm going to eat the junk food. I'm going to not go to the gym. There's a whole sequence of events that happens when I think like that. So sometimes it's not what I want, but it's what I need.
Sometimes when I'm beating myself up, gives me the motivation to push harder. It's like,
Mm,
okay, if I can look back and I made it through this before and I didn't just collapse or die or whatever those catastrophes would be, I made it through and I can do it more. So sometimes reflecting on those tough times are motivational.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It's motivational and sometimes it's what you need to get through, right? You need that little oomph. The way that I describe it is we need hope.
Hmm.
Sometimes we give up because we think nothing's possible. We are too bogged down with things. There's nothing we can do about it. And that's not always true, even in situations where it feels untrue. Even if it's a healthcare situation where you're like, there's nothing I can do, that's not true usually. Sometimes there are situations that you didn't choose. The decision was made for you. Life happened, something, something bad happened and you don't have a choice. You have to deal with it. But oftentimes there is a glimmer of hope, a different way of looking at something, a different way to approach something, a different perspective you can take. And we just need that hope so that we don't give up.
Yes. Hope is so important to know that there's more. There's more to come. Let's take a moment and kind of recap where we've come from of, it really is important how we make decisions and making sure we do that reflection and look at the emotion and not just prioritize, but look at the reasons why and keep moving forward anyway. Find that chance to write down the things and look at them and decide what's the driving factor behind these? What is the motivation? And let the emotion be part of that. I really want to be the senior VP or the executive VP because of this. It's okay to want to feel important. Can we find it somewhere else? Because you are important just the way you are right now. And a title or another notch on the belt is not making you better. You are perfect. And I want everybody to know that it's okay to doubt yourself, but it's also okay to be just who you are right now. And I think all that decision-making process needs you to know that you're okay no matter what decision it is, but put your emotion in it and choose it for the right reason.
Yeah, yeah. The only thing I would add to that, you summarized it beautifully. The only thing I would add to that is not to judge ourselves because
Mm,
sometimes we want what we want. There's a time in life where we want to be successful. We want to have we want to accomplish certain things. That's okay. As long as we know that that's what it is, right? Sometimes we want time to ourselves and we don't really want to be around our kids. That's okay. So not judging ourselves for what we want, what we need, what decisions we make. I think that's another really key perspective that it is what it is. And the more we judge ourselves, the more we end up creating resentment because we feel like we're not choosing what we want, even though, we know that we want something different. We do what we think we have to do. So I think that judgment is really important, is not to judge. It's okay to want what we want.
right. Goes back to when we were talking about feeling guilty.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a judgment that we put on ourselves.
Yes.
So, yeah, I love it. How about sharing a little bit about you, what you do, and what is that last minute word of wisdom you'd like to share with our friend?
Yeah, sure. Anyone can find me on livingxo.com. Please reach out. It's where I talk about all of this kind of stuff, my podcast, all of that. Um, Really, I'm just interested in helping people live a life that feels good to them. And I guess the last words of wisdom is just pay attention to the things that are around you, the things that are going on inside you, in your mind, in your life. Just pay attention without judgment. Just pay attention because that helps to open your eyes to possibilities, to hope. It helps to open your eyes to places where you might be too hard on yourself or where you can change or where there are opportunities to change if you're not happy with your life. There are things that we can do. And I think paying attention, that awareness is really a good place to start. So I have lots of resources. People can reach out anytime. I would love to help.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here with us. It's helped me a lot just to understand even more depth in the decision making process and get myself the opportunity to feel into those decisions. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Rishma and I are not medical or mental licensed professionals. We are not here for medical advice, just people that want to see you live your best life. And if we can smooth the path, we're here for it. So thank you for joining and stay tuned for the next episode.
Are you tired of waking up exhausted? You are not alone. If you're looking to take your life back, let's start with the simple step of adjusting your self-talk. Stay tuned for the next episode with your host, Lara Jane. Remember to follow the show so you don't miss the next simple step that you can use to feel more confident. And please leave an honest review.